Hey everybody, welcome to Conversations with Steve and Art. And today we're going to be talking about misrepresentations of Jesus.
There's a few of them out there. Yeah, there's all kinds of crazy things that people say about him. And some of the portrayals, one of my personal favorites. You ever seen the movie The Knight's Tale?
No.
With Heath Ledger. There's a funny line in it where he says, well, everybody knows Jesus is an Englishman. And it just cracks me up every time I see it, and it's like...
With blonde hair and blue eyes.
Right. But having said that, when I was at seminary, they had pictures of Jesus from around the world.
Right.
And there was an African Jesus, there was a Chinese Jesus. You could tell the one was Japanese because of the background and whatnot. And so it was just very interesting to see him portrayed from all these different cultures.
Right.
So what we tend to do is we take him in to make him like us.
Right.
And he's like, oh, he has to be like us. Well, no, that's not how it works. We have to be like him is more the reality of it, and we have to seek that rather than shifting into ourselves.
I can see the need for wanting to make him more like us so we can relate to him somehow.
Right.
I mean, that makes sense.
Right.
But in the end, he was a Middle Eastern Jew.
Yeah.
And
and
that was the culture that he was, from.
Yep.
And so he probably looked very different than us.
Well, and the range of people that he was able, even in the Gospels, the range of people that he was able to build a relationship with is pretty striking.
Right.
From the religious to prostitutes to foreigners to everybody else in between, he found ways of building bridges and relationships with people regardless, which tells you a lot about his character. And it kind of makes sense of this idea that people would make him like themselves, because all these stories, people took him in as if he was one of them to some degree.
Right. And it was because it doesn't, in the end, it doesn't matter what he looked like.
Right.
All that matters is who he was.
Correct.
And how he approached his people, or how he approached the people that he was trying to reach.
Right.
So.
Well, and that's kind of what brought up this topic we're gonna get into. I sent you, I guess earlier in the week, this quote from C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis, of course, is one of my favorites, and currently, I've read 7 of his books this year. I'm really I picked up the pace.
I'm embarrassed to say I haven't read any of them.
He's just one of my favorite authors. I can't help it. And I genuinely enjoy his writing style and everything like that. And but it's very different. But I read The Great Divorce over the course of like 2 days. It just flew. It was fast. It was easy, fairly easy read, because it's more of a vision and allegory than it is deep theological, like slogging through hard content, which some have defined his writing as being more of that, slogging through hard concepts rather than just telling a story. And so when he does tell a story with a meaning to it, it's always easier to get through. So it's fun. It's been fun. But the quote in particular, I've mentioned it in sermons before, and I guarantee I'll mention it again at some point, because I just really like it so much. It's referred to as the Trilemma, the Lewis Trilemma. And I want to read the quote, and then we're going to kind of pull bits and pieces and share thoughts. And you had some things that you shared before we went on that I thought were very interesting and related to this that I'd like to dive into too. Misconceptions.
Which could be another...
Well, and we'll return to them. I think we take one of those at a time.
Discussion, actually.
I think we could each take one of those at a time. This could be an introduction to
Right.
5 more things that we do going forward.
Right.
And I think it should be, because I think they're very interesting.
Right.
But anyway, here's the quote. This is from Mere Christianity. I am trying here to prevent anyone saying the really foolish thing that people often say about him, Jesus that is. I'm ready to accept Jesus as a great moral teacher, but I don't accept his claim to be God. That is the one thing we must not say. A man who was merely a man and said the sort of things Jesus said would not be a great moral teacher. He would either be a lunatic on the level with the man who says he is a poached egg, or else he would be the devil of hell. You must make your choice. Either this man was and is the Son of God, or else a madman or something worse. You can shut him up for a fool, you can spit at him and kill him as a demon, or you can fall at his feet and call him Lord and God. But let us not come with any patronizing nonsense about his being a great human teacher. He has not left that open to us. He did not intend to. Now it seems to me obvious that he was neither a lunatic nor a fiend, and consequently, however strange or terrifying or unlikely it may seem, I have to accept the view that he was and is God. End quote. That's a lot of words.
It's a lot of words, and it's a lot of it's a lot to take in.
It's a ton to take in.
Deep, it goes, yeah. I like the part where he says he has not left that open to us.
Yes.
And the thing about that is, and he's right, because Jesus nobody in his lifetime ever said that he was a great moral teacher.
Right.
He's a really good rabbi. He's a really good moral teacher. Nobody said that.
Right.
Everybody either loved him or hated him.
Yes.
And it was one extreme or the other. There was no middle ground at all. It was one extreme or the other. And so, it's either hate or adoration, really.
Yep.
Or anger or whatever.
Yeah, he really didn't leave any other option, and that was his intention. And there's many that will say that Jesus never said he was God while he was here. Well, he most certainly did. If you understand Jewish thought and the Jewish language and the way they approached Scripture, references to being the Son of Man is a reference to Daniel, the vision of one coming like a Son of Man from heaven. That's a reference. I want to say it's John chapter 8, just coming off the top of my head. He says, before Abraham was...
because he's, the Bible, it's ingrained in his...
Oh, it didn't come easily. But he says, before Abraham was, I am. Now,
and that was an obvious back in those days.
And they tried to kill him when he said it.
Right.
They literally tried to kill the man when he said that.
Right.
Because they knew what he was saying. And when he was on trial before his crucifixion, he makes references to who he was and why he's here. Right. And, they got that he was. They gnashed their teeth and they were yelling that he was committing blasphemy by claiming to be God and the Son of God, equal to God. So he most definitely made those claims while he was here. And to say otherwise is an inaccurate reading of Scripture, frankly.
So, yeah, a great moral teacher is completely out the window.
Absolutely. And so many of the things that he teaches wouldn't even make sense necessarily from a certain, if you look at it just morally.
Right. Yeah, there was more there than just moral. I mean, he did teach morality.
He absolutely did. He taught it the best way possible.
Right. But he didn't, but it was only, wow, it's getting dark out there.
Yeah, it is.
We're about to get a thunderstorm dumped on us, I think. Yeah, but there was way more to it than that. There was just, I think more so that I think the thing that he wanted to get across more so than anything was, I'm God in the flesh, and this is how I want you to live.
Right.
This is how I want you to follow me. And it's not about religion.
Right.
It's about being in relationship with me.
Yes, and that's exactly it. It wasn't about him showing us how to live a life that is worthy of his love and of entering into heaven. It's about accepting the one who is worthy so that we can be taken into heaven.
Right.
And it's all about grace, and that's what the gospel is. And Timothy Keller laid out the gospel this way. He said, the gospel is knowing that you're far worse than you feared,
right,
but also knowing that you're far more loved than you could ever dare hope.
Right.
And so it's knowing how sinful we are, yet knowing how desperately it would seem Jesus pursued to bring us back to him. And by his death and resurrection, man, oh man, right? Like, you don't do that for somebody you don't want around you. And he didn't do it because we were worthy. He did it because we're unworthy. And that's a very key component. He never did any of his teaching saying, you do this and then I'll accept you. He said, great, you've accepted me. Now do this.
Right.
It was always the response.
It's kind of like the anti-religion thing to do.
Yes.
Because we're always saying, like, religion is an attempt to impress God.
Yeah.
And to save yourself.
That's my most, yeah.
And to save yourself.
Yep.
But But since it's painfully obvious that that doesn't work,
Right.
because we're unable to do that, that's where he stepped in and took care of it for us. So, and that's where the grace part comes in. And that's, and that's really what it's all about. The other one, the other misconception, misrepresentation is that, and this was mentioned in that article you sent me earlier this week, that he's a legend.
Yes.
I loved that one because nobody in his time would have created a legend like that. They would have never imagined it and made it up, because it would have been, to say this man was God, it would have been blasphemous.
At best.
At best. And if it wasn't true, and all these guys died for this, and if they knew that it was false, if they knew it was a lie, but they were just trying to create a legend, you don't die because you want to create a legend. You don't die a martyr, that is.
That's right.
Because you want to go down in history as being somebody who created a legend. And if it was a legend, it wouldn't have lasted. Eventually it would have been the people that somebody would have, came out and said, hey, but this, and this, and shot it completely down. And it would have been a legend, but it still would have been a legend, but everybody would say, nah, that's not true.
Well, I think it was, I want to say it was Chuck Colson, and I'm paraphrasing, who was caught in Watergate.
Right.
And he talked about how some of the most influential men in the world at the time couldn't keep a conspiracy for like 10 days.
10 days, right.
Right? And he's saying, so you're going to convince me that all these people kept this legend, this conspiracy going for 2,000 years?
Right.
I'm sorry, not buying it.
Yeah.
And it's just such it's such an important thing.
Not likely.
It's not likely, no. That would be like in 1,000 years from now, people literally thinking the Force was real and becoming Jedi. Like, that's the equivalent. Like, that's truly the equivalent of it. And not that wouldn't be cool, because I wouldn't mind a lightsaber, but that's neither here nor there. I'd probably lose a limb.
Fun.
I'd lose a limb or two, but that's not the point. The point is, though, that if you make something up, it's not going to prove to be true throughout history. It's eventually going to hit a wall, and there has to be some measure of truth behind it, which is why every cult and every false religion starts on a nugget of truth. Like every good cult starts. I heard somebody once say, every good cult, you can't start a good cult without misquoting Paul. So they take a portion of scripture and they pull it out of context, but they can say, this is why you can believe it, because it's in the Bible. Like, for example, Jehovah's Witnesses.
Isn't that true of our culture, though?
Yes.
We like to take things out of context.
Oh, we're good at it.
To satisfy our own personal agenda.
Yep.
We do it everywhere.
Right.
Religion, politics, everywhere.
Well, I mean, but here's the danger in that, right? Watch this. Here we go. So Cain killed Abel. Go and do likewise. Like, that's the danger of it, right? You pull things out of context, they could say something very deadly, potentially deadly, or dangerous, or wrong.
Right.
And if you're intentionally seeking to take things out of context, you can manipulate people like crazy. And, our culture is a case in point in that. We believe what we're told to believe, like good sheep, right?
Well, I think more so nowadays, we believe what we want to believe.
That too. Well, we can look on the internet and find anything.
Or we believe what is, or some people like to believe what is popular.
Yes.
So.
Well, it's easier.
It's just easier, and it avoids conflict. And if you are in conflict with somebody, you've got a lot of you're on the popular side anyway, so you got a lot of people on your side. It's just the way. It's because we all want to be loved. We all want to feel like we belong to something.
At the risk of getting myself in a little bit of trouble, we've even done that with math.
Math?
Oh yeah. There's some out there that are teaching math is, I guess, racist. 2 plus 2 doesn't necessarily equal 4. I mean, I want to find the restaurant that works with that, because they're saying that 2 plus 2 equals 5, can say that in some instances. I've heard people talking about it, and I don't know what to think of it. I just heard somebody saying the other day that, you know, it is still true that 2 + 2 = 4, and I was like, why does somebody have to say that? Like, why is that not obvious and self-evident? But it's also grasping to change reality.
Like a flat earther movement or something.
Right, and to shape reality to what we want rather than what it really is. I think the truth is scary, and knowing the truth, what can you do other than go with it?
Well, yeah, we don't always want the truth to be what it is. And, yeah. So, it's like we were talking about this thing that I was listening to when Steve mentioned this topic. My mind immediately went to, when he said misrepresentations of God, my mind immediately went to this sermon I listened to by the great preacher Andy Stanley. He had like 6 different representations of God, and that usually begin in childhood.
Right.
Some of them later on, but there was the bodyguard God who always protects us from everything. Doesn't say that anymore.
And I see a quote that goes with that. A good God would not allow bad things to happen to good people. Since bad things never happen to good people, there must be a good God. And that's kind of the mindset behind it.
Right. Yeah.
But you see the folly in that very quickly.
Flaw in the logic.
So many good people have suffered and died. And the fact that Jesus
Including
died.
Jesus.
Right. Exactly my point. Yeah, exactly. So anyway, the next one. I just found that interesting because I found that the list and I just found that very quote. Yeah.
An on-demand God. that was my favorite one.
Wait, hold on. I think it's on right now.
On-demand God is the God that protects us from, or that answers all of our prayers.
Right.
Because we're praying a good prayer here, God.
Right.
I need you to answer this, and if He doesn't answer it, well, I guess He's not there.
Well,
Because it's like almost as if we're like turning that around to make him serve us, as if we're His God or something. Like He's there to meet our every need.
Yep.
Or something, but it doesn't really work that way.
No, it does not.
God didn't say, I came to give you everything you want if you just pray for it. He said, I want you to be the server, not the servee. This is a whole different, and people don't like that.
No.
And people don't like wait a minute, I have to serve?
I think one of the expressions of this used to be
Not that everybody is against doing good in the world. I think there's a lot of people actually that are all for doing good in the world, but don't necessarily believe they're in God, or that God, that Jesus was the one that really was the catalyst to giving us the desire to do that. And I think there's plenty of good people in the world that are not Christians that want to do good in the world, that want to serve and that want to help. So don't misread me when I said that before. But I think a lot of people just don't want to like I said, own up to the fact that it was Jesus that kind of got that whole mindset started. Because before that, everybody was just every man for himself. Right? It wasn't. People didn't think that way really before him.
No. And I have to admit too, when I first heard you say this on-demand God, I immediately thought of my remote control for my TV.
Well, I think that was the idea. I think that was the thought he was trying to conjure up.
Well, there's a button in the middle. You just push that button and you can get one of 1,000 different shows or movies. And none of them seem to have any interruptions or commercials.
Right.
Or anything to turn your attention away from them.
Right.
So you get your focus on exactly what you want, and you don't have to hear anything else outside of that. And if you don't like it, you just hit exit and try again. And I think that's to some degree what we do to God. Another term that used to be used for this similar concept was the vending machine God.
Yeah.
But I'm sure there's people out there.
Same idea. Yeah.
But I'm sure there's some people that would not even know what a vending machine is at this point.
Right.
Because we dial it up on our phone and we pull up to the store now and they bring it to your car.
I liked the what did he say about the boyfriend God? There was the boyfriend God. I can't remember what he said about that one.
We're going to revisit these.
We'll revisit
Yeah.
these. I like the anti-science God, though. That was a good one.
I got two things with that one. It says, two of the qualifying remarks of this were, quit thinking, start believing.
Yeah.
Now, we weren't made to be that way.
Like, check your brain at the door
Yes.
when you go into church.
Yes.
And then when you leave church, then you have it back.
And that is very much the opposite of the way Jesus lived and thought and acted, and it's very much not the way the church has acted in the past. Anti-science and church would never have been said together because, in a lot of ways, the pursuit of science stemmed from the church.
It did.
In a very powerful way. A lot of what we do and a lot of what we know about our world in general comes from the church seeking to understand God's creation.
Sure.
It's fascinating, and this one might get me in trouble too. I don't know, but I don't like the science or God mentality.
No.
Well, he has it right here. God or science is a false alternative. There's nothing that says that science replaces God, and there's nothing that says God can't work through science either. And, one of the ones I remember hearing in college was, they really threw this one at us, was the idea that things like evolution, like we see it as a threat as Christians. But we don't have to see it as a threat, because let's just say for a second that's how life came into being. But how did it start? Where did that very first thing come from? It doesn't go far enough. It explains the process without explaining the purpose or the origin. And therein lies the problem. Like there's spaces that the two can dance and play together and really come up with this beautiful interaction that gives us a broader picture. And right now we live in a time where science has become a religion. I would argue that.
Oh, I would too.
Follow the science is what I keep seeing all over the place. It's interesting. Listen to the science. But here's the funny thing about scientists. Unless I've missed something, not one of them is perfect. And none of them are going to have perfect knowledge of a situation to be able to tell us exactly what is right and what is wrong without doubt. What's more, science is a way to gain knowledge, not necessarily an ethical view of the world. And that's an important component too, because things like eugenics that were used to as a backdrop, a scientific backdrop for the Holocaust, for example, were good science, quote unquote, of the day. Just following the science leads down some dark roads and has in history.
Yeah.
And so I don't mean to do anything other than just to point out that reality that selling out fully to something like that's the imperfect and a human endeavor ultimately leads to idolatry and pain and misery and suffering, in my opinion.
Yes. I don't think it's, you say it's your opinion, but I don't really think you could refute that.
I welcome people to try. I'd love the conversation. I'd love that conversation. I would relish the opportunity to have that conversation with somebody. I would be fascinated to hear someone else's viewpoint on it.
I'm sure somebody could conjure up an argument against that, but I don't know.
Science is the end-all be-all. Is just as dangerous as government being the end-all be-all. Just as dangerous as anything other than Jesus Christ, our God, Father, Son, Holy Spirit being the end-all be-all. So that's just that's coming from a theologian.
When you create everything, design it a specific way, and insist that it should be a specific way, and then come to earth to show us how it should be,
right,
and die on our behalf, how can you not say that's the end-all be-all?
Right, exactly.
Everything.
So there's nothing. Okay, so we've looked at bodyguard. We've mentioned bodyguard God. We've mentioned on-demand God, boyfriend God, anti-science God. What are the other ones?
Which leads to Gap God.
Okay, is that like clothing?
Gap God. Yeah.
Does that mean nice jeans?
Yeah,
he was overpriced clothing.
He was definitely not an American Eagle shopper.
Okay,
He was
fair.
Gap only. No. So
there's a town in Lancaster. Out by Lancaster's Gap.
Gap?
Yeah, there's a town on the way to Lancaster called Gap.
I'll probably see that
Okay.
this weekend.
Explain this one to me.
So the Gap God is really just an extension, I think, of the anti-science God. Like if it can't be explained through science, God must have done it.
Yeah.
And that's not always reliable, because eventually, and that there's a pitfall in that too, because if you say, well, God did it, well, which he did, but it doesn't really explain how God did it.
Right.
And eventually science comes along and solves that mystery, and they go, well, where's your God now?
Right.
And then, but you can still say, you can say God did everything. You just don't use God as a scapegoat to explain the unexplainable.
Right. He's not caulk for your beliefs.
He's not cock. That's good. That's good.
He's not the house is almost together, let's just stick a little caulk in here and let God fill this one little gap, because I've got everything else under control.
Right.
So let's just stick God in here and we're solid at this point, right? And no breezes, but it eliminates the holes in our beliefs, and that's not what God is for. God is not meant to fill the gaps in what we believe. He's meant to be the foundation of everything we believe. Right. And the ultimate, I know that I've heard that this term is outdated or whatever, but he's the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. Yeah. Like he's the one who trailblazed, who set the path, and he's also the goal. So don't you think that everything in between kind of flows from him too?
Yeah.
I mean, that's...
He's like dark matter. Yeah. It's an astronomy term, dark matter. It's this unexplained phenomenon out there that we don't understand it, but it kind of binds the galaxy. It's like the Force.
Yes. Well, there we go, right? That's it. That's all the answer that we need, right?
So, and then there was the guilt god.
Oh,
the guilt god that just keeps us being, and we want to abandon that god all the time, because we don't want to feel guilty about all our past sins. So if we walk away from the guilt god and just say everything is okay, it's all good as long as I'm not hurting anybody, anything goes, because the guilt god isn't tapping me on the shoulder and going, no.
We'll have to get into this one a lot, because I've heard a lot of good stuff lately about guilt versus shame. Yeah. And how guilt isn't always bad. And guilt,
I think, is a self-inflicted thing.
It is.
I think shame is inflicted from one person to another. Guilt is something that is self-inflicted, I think. I think that's the distinction.
I want to get into it, because one of the things I heard too about it, which I thought was interesting, guilt is recognizing bad behavior. Shame is blaming it and just continuing to carry it. Yeah. Guilt can be something that changes you.
I guess that's another way.
Potentially. Yeah. There's many ways to look at it. I would love to unpack these ideas together. We'll come back. We'll revisit this, certainly.
Yeah, we should. I mean, we could have like a whole series on any one of those particular ideas.
Oh, and I think we should. I think maybe we split the list into 3 parts and revisit it. But I think it would be very interesting to spend some time on these bad views of God. Yeah. But yeah, and that comes back to bad views of Jesus, of course. Like to say he's just this certain way and nothing else, we lose something in the translation. Yeah. And we lose a lot in the translation, because he was a man full of personality. There's a sense of humor in the Gospels. Yeah. The road to Emmaus,
it's the best representation we have of him,
right? Those
Gospels, because those are the guys that knew him.
Right.
And they wrote all this stuff down for our sake, fortunately. And there have been attempts by biblical scholars or religious scholars to write books based on their knowledge of, it was like that book Zealot that I was telling you about. What was the guy's name? Reza Aslan? Yeah, Aslan. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his first name right, if it's Reza or Reza, whatever. But he wrote that book, Zealot, and he was talking about, he was trying to depict the historical Jesus based on what he knows about the culture back then. And I'm sure he's totally well informed about the culture. Right. But one thing that the whole time I was reading that book, and he's a Muslim, he's not a Christian believer, and he was basically saying it's a great way to live. He was a great teacher, but he's not. Basically, in the end, by the end of the book, you pretty much realize, okay, he doesn't really believe he's God in the flesh. And he said stuff like he was probably a disciple of John the Baptist at one point in time, which really conflicts with everything you read in the Bible. And then also that he was, stuff like he was probably married because it was shameful for a man to not be married back in those days. But the thing about that is, Jesus wasn't an ordinary man. So he's basically just trying to put him in the category of like an ordinary man, and without at least entertaining the fact that he could possibly be God in the flesh, and maybe that's why he didn't get married, because he doesn't care what people think. Again, he wasn't trying to like conjure up. He wasn't trying to just be a teacher. He was trying to save us. Well, not trying to. He was on a mission to save us from sin and death.
Right.
There was more to his mission than just being a good teacher.
Absolutely.
So yeah, it was, and everything in that book was pure speculation as far as I was concerned. It's not a good representation because he wasn't there.
Right.
I mean, he could study the culture. Sure, great. Know everything about the culture. But you didn't see everything, that guy didn't see everything happen. The people that wrote those Gospels did.
Well, and we need to be careful what we throw around without properly studying the Gospels and understanding them in their context. Because I've heard recently that Jesus might have been racist. No,
yeah,
there's a shock in our modern day and age. Somebody being accused of being racist, somebody good.
Right.
Potentially, right? So, I heard that one the other day, and if you know anything about
I don't know, we won't go there.
But if you know anything about the context in which he lived, the fact that he went to Samaria instead of around it proves that he was not racist.
He went too, and he encouraged his disciples to go out into the world, to all the nations of the world, and preach the gospel, not just stay in our little bubble.
Yep, and he healed a Roman soldier's child.
He healed a Roman soldier's ear.
Yeah.
When Peter cut it off.
Yeah. So I mean, if
right there and then, just
right,
back on, good.
I've also heard that he was sexist.
A person that was going to kill him.
Yeah. Yep.
It's like, all right, I'll take care of you.
It also gets taught that he's sexist. I've heard in some instances too.
Who?
I've heard.
Who said that?
I went to seminary. They make up all kinds of stuff there.
Oh.
Yeah, it's amazing what they come up with, because some people just flat out ignore the Bible because it's easier. It's less offensive.
Oh, yeah.
It's less challenging.
It's totally easy.
But the fact that he had women as his disciples, he had women as his first witnesses to his resurrection. If you're not paying attention to the significance of those things, you might think that. But he was light years beyond his time in that regard. He saw the truth. He wasn't beyond his
Do you
time.
think that was preordained, predestined, like that he was made it? That he had any kind of control over that? That the women were the first ones to find the empty tomb?
I don't think it's any accident that the women were his best disciples, and who was going to linger the longest at the tomb? His best disciples.
Right.
So yeah, I think it was intentional. I think that was part of God's plan.
Yeah.
That he was, in a way, he was rewarding one of his most faithful disciples. In another way, he was showing that, look, I'm not bound by the same cultural standards you are. I'm bound by my standards, which go far above and beyond all of yours.
Right.
And I think there's many layers to that. That's something we could unpack for a good 45 minutes if we took the time. But,
sure could.
but Mary, all the Marys, the Mary crew, right? Martha was one of his best disciples as well. Yeah, there was his mother Mary, there was Mary Magdalene, there was Mary and Martha, there was, there's probably another, there's at least one other Mary, and maybe another two, I don't know.
It's a popular name.
It was. but he made it clear that they were as much, by his way, the way he treated them, they were as much his disciples as the men were, which would have been shocking in the time. It would have been offensive.
I mean, he crossed all the boundaries.
He did.
He had a tax collector.
Yeah.
He had women.
Yeah.
He had all kinds of people that were not viewed, in society as upstanding or even desirable people as his. And there were even conflicts between them because of that.
Yes. Big time.
And it was definitely a. But it was an opportunity for him to. He did that on purpose, so he could teach them.
Well, it gives us a glimpse of the church from the start as being people who are very different and to some degree would otherwise never talk to each other.
Right.
But yeah, the fact that he had a tax collector and a zealot in his crew at the same time.
Right.
Like, the zealot would have been the one trying to kill tax collectors.
Yeah.
Or the Romans. And the tax collector would have been seen as a traitor to being a Jew in the first place. So, yeah, he crossed every barrier, he crossed every boundary. He didn't give us the choice of saying he was just a good teacher. He made it very clear he was far beyond that. Which kind of brings us back to our C.S. Lewis quote. And any thoughts before we kind of wrap this up? Because we're going to return, I want to return to that list of bad views of God. I think that's very interesting.
Yeah.
So we're going to come back to that. Maybe we'll spend 2-3 times on that.
The only other thing that I can think of that, and this is like a defense, this kind of goes back to apologetics. If he was a liar, why would he have done that to himself? What personal gain would he have gotten out of that?
3 years of torment as he taught people who didn't get anything he said.
Yeah, and some nails through, appendages.
Right.
So
Yeah, if he were lying, he would have lied to gain power rather than to give his life away.
Yeah. Yeah, but you're not gonna. But he wasn't trying to gain power. It was very obvious.
He already had the power.
Well, yeah.
But like I'm
talking about worldly power.
Oh no, I agree.
He wasn't trying to gain any worldly power.
Right.
Nothing that is in those Gospels would even remotely suggest that.
Right.
So why would he do it?
Yeah. He wouldn't.
He wouldn't.
Wouldn't make logical sense.
Nobody in their right mind would.
Which is the second part.
Right. And maybe he was crazy, but if he was crazy and he died that horrible death, he never would have, there would have been no resurrection, and then there wouldn't have been 11 other guys that, or 12, really going to count Paul, that died as martyrs.
Right.
After the fact, if that was none of that, he would have been like another David Koresh. His movement would have died with him.
They would have seen right through it.
Would have been gone.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It had been over right there and then.
Yep.
But it wasn't. So.
The conclusion of C.S. Lewis with all of that. Now, it seems to me obvious that he was neither a lunatic nor a fiend. And consequently, however strange or terrifying or unlikely it may seem, I have to accept the view that he was and is God.
Yeah.
He is Lord. We worship him as such. Scripture points to it. Scripture, most historically backed document that we could probably ever come up with. No document has been so meticulously and carefully passed down and we accept so many other documents as historical.
Yeah.
Even from that time. But with the meticulous nature with which they approached the sharing and the passing down of it, they preserved it as it was meant to be. Mm-hmm. And through it, we come to this beautiful realization that Jesus is God. He is Lord. And he came to redeem us, to die for us, to rise from the grave and conquer death, and to show us the way, to be the way to the Father. As he said in John 14:6, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me.
So, when I look at the evidence, I can't help but believe.
Yes.
I can't help but believe it because there's no way around it for me. And I think I think anybody that really carefully looks at the evidence, objectively, not with a skeptical eye, just kind of looking at it like an investigative reporter, which there have been a few that have written books. Strobel, yeah, is one of them. But you got to look at it like that. You have to look at it, and he looked at it. He even looked at it skeptically until he didn't. Yeah. So if you can sit back and you can just look at all the facts and you can read into what's being and think about what actually was documented in those Gospels, you can't. You have no choice but to believe it. If you really think about what was said and what actually happened. And the fact that the Gospels were written within how many years after?
The latest was 55, 56 years after he ascended.
Yeah.
That's the latest.
So within those 55 years, there's a lot of people still alive that witnessed all that stuff happening and could not. And none of them stepped up and said, "No, it didn't happen like that." Because if that happened, you know how fast news like that travels.
Very fast.
Doesn't matter what culture or what time you live in. Gossip spreads like wildfire.
And that's interesting. I like that you brought that up because that's one of the things, the bits of evidence that those who don't want to believe point out. Well, the Gospels were written so long after he.
Oh, no, they weren't.
No, they weren't. They definitely weren't. I want to say the earliest book of what we have that was written and passed around was like in the 40s. The 40s.
They just found new.
Not 1940.
No, the 0040s.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. No, they just found more of the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Yes. There's like 10,000 copies of the New Testament floating around in the ancient world. It's an obscene number. And that's actually one of the things that caused me to believe it, that the fact that it was written so much, purposely put down and with very minor differences at times, like a letter off, or punctuation off, or something like that. People being so meticulous and methodical and making sure it got passed on and shared exactly as it was presented. I think that says enough for me.
It's more than enough, I
Yep.
think. So, well, it's been a good conversation.
Indeed, we'll have to pick this up again at some point.
Yeah.
All right, well, thank you for joining us.
Yep. Have a great week, everybody. God bless you, and see you next time.